The next speaker is Mark Perry.
Great, Penny. Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? I want to thank you for inviting me here. I want to thank the association for having me here as well. La dernière fois que je suis venu à Québec, c'était en 1984. Je viens de finir mon bac en éducation à l'Université du Nouveau-Brunswick. Je comprenais 3 mots en français. Oui, non, bonjour. Je suis arrivé à Lévis, à l'autre côté de la rivière. Au lever du soleil, j'ai vu, c'était une belle image, j'ai vu le château Frontenac sur la colline, tellement beau. Cette fois, je suis venu, j'ai quitté la salle de classe à 3h30, très fatigué. J'ai été dans l'avion 1 heure après, et puis, comme une tempête, je suis arrivé ici. Alors, j'espère que je vais avoir l'occasion d'aller voir le château Frontenac cette fois. Mais tout ça pour dire que c'est un grand plaisir d'être ici à Québec. The overarching question is, what is the shape and place of historical thinking in high schools? Penny has asked me to address a sub-question to that, which I'm grateful for. I don't think I could answer the first question. I have had some difficulty with the second question as well, and it is, what are the challenges to addressing the gap in the history classroom? In other words, the gap between the consensus that teaching for historical thinking is a good idea and what's actually happening in the classroom. I don't feel 100% qualified to answer the question, but what I can do is this. I can tell you that through recent professional development experiences, like the experiences that Penny mentioned at the outset, being involved in the Spirit of Democracy project with Alan Sears and Andy Hughes at the University of New Brunswick and colleagues from several provinces in Canada, and being involved in Peter's project, the Benchmarks of Historical Thinking project with Peter and Carla Peck, and the third valuable PD experience, the Canadian Battlefields Tour, the Canadian Battlefields Foundation Tour in 2007. Those experiences and the people that I was able to work with have helped me to shape some of the things that I'd like to say today. I've tapped into those resources and those individuals to get their sense of what's happening for them, what their colleagues are involved in on the ground in the school. So I'd like to share those views with you. That's where I'm coming from. There's good news. Everybody I talk to, they indicate to me that teaching for historical thinking is a great idea, terrific idea. There's consensus. We agree. Departments of education in every jurisdiction around the country agree. Peter has just indicated to you or shown you some outcomes from a couple of those jurisdictions. I'd like to read from the foundation document, which is a curriculum document that was written by the Departments of Education of the 4 Atlantic provinces. Students will be expected to use basic concepts and vocabulary associated with time, continuity, and change. Demonstrate the views of the past are shaped by diverse perspectives. Ask questions associated with historical methodology to answer what happened, how do we know what we know, and why is it important? These are all questions and all outcomes that are directed towards teaching for historical thinking. I didn't give you the preamble to that. By the end of grade 3, students will be expected to. And I think that's a key thing to just a key seed to plant. So I just want to put that to the side for a moment. Here's the bad news. We're not doing it. Teachers across the country in the three territories and provinces, with an exception, I think, and I may ask Elizabeth Cressman to address this a little bit later if we have a little bit of time later on, but I think that this is not occurring. So I'd like to respond to the question why. Roland Case talks about, when he talks about critical thinking, he will indicate, and Alan Sears and others will indicate that although teachers agree that critical thinking is a major component of what we want to be doing to create an effective social studies or history program, teachers themselves don't often think critically. They don't think critically in their own lives. We pretend sometimes at the period of negotiations to be thinking critically, to be thinking in a reasoned way, but I see people that I have complete respect for, completely reasonable people, behave in irrational ways. We pretend to be thinking critically, but there's a mob mentality that sometimes rules. I think we can say the same thing about teaching for historical thinking. There are, I think, few teachers that engage in the practices outside of their school lives, that they haven't developed an ethic or a passion for these types of critical analyses in their own lives. And I think it's difficult to show that passion in the classroom if it's not demonstrated in one's own life. So there is some crossover between, I think, Roland Case's work and Peter's work. I think another reason that, at least what I'm hearing, another reason that historical thinking gets, short shrift in the classroom is that often teachers who are teaching history in the high schools do not have a history background. And that may be okay, because we work with people who do not have a history background who are doing wonderful things in the classroom. Or teachers have a history background, but they haven't spent a lot of time talking about in their history programs about historical thinking. The good news is this. Having been involved in several workshops where this is the key focus, once teachers are introduced to the concepts or the dimensions of historical thinking, they become very excited about the dimensions. They become almost evangelical about the dimensions. They want to go and tell it on the mountain, and the first thing that they will want to do is to create the PowerPoint, to tell everybody else about what it is they're learning. No offense, Peter. Okay. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. But that's not enough. The workshop feel-good moment is not enough. It doesn't sustain the work. It doesn't create an ethic for moving this to the classroom. The residual effect is short-lived. Teachers come back to the classroom after a couple of days of attempting to implement some of the notions around the dimensions, see the other parts of the routine of teaching take precedence. The discipline issues, for example, in the hallway, the duty issues in the hallway, all the political stuff that occurs on a staff. In a lot of ways, I think that we as teachers are institutionalized. We move at the sound of a bell. Ding, we have to be here. We go through the same door frame every day at the same time. Certain responsibilities are imposed upon us, and I think in a lot of ways, our culture is dictated by someone else. We really have, the only time we have academic freedom, I think, is when we close the door. Okay? I think that my colleagues think, the people I come in contact think that outcomes ought to direct what we do. So that's why I started with the outcomes, that they're clearly saying this is what we should do. So basically what I've said to this point is that we all agree this is a good idea. I hate to criticize anything, I hate to be negative about anything unless I can offer some solutions. So some of the solutions that I'm going to offer now about how we bridge that gap, decrease that gap, are presented with the obstacle. So I'll present you with an obstacle and then a solution, and the solutions have come in from across the country. Some of them are really neat. First obstacle, what is historical thinking? What is historical consciousness? That hurdle has to be overcome. There has to be a dialogue about that. Try with your colleagues, someone who has not been introduced to the concept, to begin to talk about that without a framework, without a common language. It's almost impossible. Because you're providing examples and there's a conceptual discussion, but they're isolated pockets of examples. Things aren't connected. But I think with the entering into the dialogue, and everybody's motivated to do that, needs some type of a framework, some type of a scaffold to do that. So here's the solution. I was grateful to be involved and continue to be involved in the Benchmarks project, and I think that clearly the dimensions presented by Peter offer a way to talk about the conceptual part of historical thinking. Second obstacle. There seems to be little training and education programs centered around historical thinking. At the university level, we see graduates coming out really pushing the chronology, and this is great. It's the base for understanding history. There's a certain degree of knowledge. There are certain events and issues and concepts that we must know, that our students should know. But that's not the end game. That's not the end point. The chronology is pushed because of the restraints of time. education programs, solution. Education programs have to move beyond that culture, that way of thinking, and actually have the university students in the history education programs engaged in creating the tasks, doing the work, creating tasks that target the dimensions, and moving beyond that, taking them for a test run. This does not cost money. A lot of universities are very close to high schools, middle schools, elementary schools. So what better way to create the seeds of a culture that can only be carried over into the schools, into teaching?